welcome to another video. This is podcast episode 57, and I do have to say that I'm very happy to be recording this episode. It has been a long time since I've been consistent with these podcast episodes, and it just feels very nice to have more structure in my life again. So let's just get right into it. I made a mistake in the last episode. I committed the cardinal sin of showing some new knitwear and not talking about it, wearing it throughout the episode and not talking about it. So it's the first thing that I'll be discussing today. So this is a 1930s sweater that I knit mostly on my machine, but I'll get to that in a second. It's from a booklet called Economy Knits Volume 1. This one came out in Australia. I got a PDF file from Subversive Femme. I'll leave a link to that in the description box below. In any case, I do believe that this booklet also came out either in the UK as well or in the US, but my gut is saying UK. In any case, it has a very interesting name. It's a smart style for that long planned holiday, but it also has a number. It's design number 819. As for the yarn that I used Holst Garns is super soft in the color tobacco. It's a 100% pure new wool, and it has a fingering weight yardage. I don't think that I wrote it down, but I do believe it's about 525 meters per 100 grams. I will put the correct yardage here. In any gauge, as for the gauge, I used 26 stitches and 36 rows in a 10 centimeter or 4-inch square. And I do believe that the pattern also used 26 stitches. I don't think that there was a row gauge. Usually with these vintage patterns, they don't give you a row gauge. They just tell you to what height you have to knit. So you have to kind of figure that out on your own and do the maths on that. As for the construction, this was actually quite interesting to do on the machine because there are some interesting rib details in the body at the front. You start off at the bottom with some 2x2 rib. You work for a couple of centimeters. I think I worked for about 7 centimeters, and then once you've done that, you start increasing on the sides in order to accommodate for the bust. So every couple of centimeters you just increase on both ends, and then once you've done that, you start working on the armhole shaping. Pretty straightforward. You bind off a number of stitches, then you start decreasing a number of stitches, and then you work your way up, and then you do some shoulder shaping. You cast off stitches every other row on the edge to get that diagonal edge angle, and I substituted that for some short rows. So actually you start off with the back here. So the back is different from the front in that it has this keyhole section right here. You work up until what they tell you in the pattern, and then you split both sides, and then you do the shoulder shaping separately. Here at the front, you have this purling garter stitch detailing at the bottom, and then you work some ribbing here. I had initially posted this on Reddit a couple of weeks ago, and someone asked if the ribbing might have been a way to work in some extra shaping, and I think here it's more decorative because there isn't that much ribbing at the front, but I have actually quite recently seen a pattern where ribbing is actually used in order to create shaping, and I think that that's a pattern that I am still working on. I'm still doing the calculations on, but it's from a German pattern from the 1930s. I think it's from, oh, I forget the I read this yarn company's name and it just kind of like blows past me. Schachenmeier. I'm not too sure how it's spelled, but I'll put the name here. It's still a yarn company. They mostly just make sock yarn and cotton yarn. I think that's what they're most known for at the moment. The way this vest is constructed is you just have your basic vest silhouette, and then at the front you have 4 darts, and those are made by means of ribbing. I believe on each side you have about 4 centimeters where you have rib stitch, and then the way you turn from rib stitch to basic stockinette stitch is that I think every centimeter or so you bind, well, you don't bind off, but you switch to stockinette stitch, and you do that 3 or 4 times. So you have kind of these 4 or 3 columns here that make up about 4 centimeters that are staggered, and that creates a slight dot effect. So they're placed here at the front and here, well, here at the front at the bottom, and then also at the front at the top, and then at the back they're only at the bottom. But that's like I said, a project that I'm still working on, and I will talk about that more in future episodes, because it is quite interesting. I think that's also one of the things that I really do enjoy about vintage patterns. There are so many different ways of achieving a certain effect, and I feel, because, you know, trends just moved way slower 100 years ago. You have different places trying out different things without them influencing each other too much, and that causes a lot of variety and a lot of interesting techniques. But then again, I should move back to this sweater. So there is some rib stitch detailing. Then once you reach the height for the neck shaping, you cast off a number of stitches, and then you just decrease up until here, the top. And you also do, of course, the shoulder shaping. So there's that, and then the sleeves are also pretty straightforward. I am not sure which direction the pattern tells you to work, but I worked bottom up. So I started off with the ribbing and then increased on the sides, and then no, I didn't. I'm looking at it. No, I tried two different styles, I think. Yes, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Okay, so I made a swatch before starting this sweater, and I thought I had made the calculations correctly, and then I started with just one sleeve because I figured, you know, it would be way easier to unravel a sleeve and way less work to knit up a sleeve and then see that it's correct or wrong, rather than doing a whole back piece or something and then finding out that it's wrong. So I did one sleeve and I worked bottom up, and I found that I didn't really enjoy doing fully fashioned increases on the machine. And also it turned out that the gauge was incorrect. So I recalculated my gauge, and then I decided to go top down. And so I started at the sleeve cap, and then I just increased by using an E cast on, which is basically the same as a backwards loop cast on with hand knitting. And then I did the sleeve cap, and then I just went down here and I just did some regular decreases and then did the 2x2 rib. That's what I did. Everything was knit flat and then seamed up. There's a seam here at the bottom. I don't think you can really see it all that well, but there's a seam here, seam at the sides, seams everywhere. And with the short rows here, I did a 3 needle bind off for a very clean seam at the top. So yes, then once all of that was done, once everything was seamed up, it was time to do the finishing, and I started off with the crochet edge here at the keyhole. And I do have to say, I need to redo this. I think it's, personally, I find it to be very sloppy, and that's just because I haven't really done that many, or I don't have a lot of experience with finishing techniques, at least when I started working on this sweater. That's just because you don't really see that many finishing techniques in modern patterns, but often the vintage patterns will tell you to make your own buttons, to crochet something here, crochet something there, and do all sorts of things, a lot of seaming as well. And so I'm learning that at the moment. So this was just some single crochet, which I am planning to take out. It has a hook and eye closure, which I also didn't properly install, so it sometimes gets loose at the back. I think one of the reasons is because I don't think this was actually supposed to be a keyhole opening. I think what I'm going to try and do is actually add some buttons here, or an extra closure here at the center, because this is quite a big keyhole. So it's either adding an extra hook and eye, or just taking this out, recrocheting it, and then adding buttons and putting some loops there. So that's that. Yes, and then moving on to the buttons. These are non-functional buttons, but I think they look so cool and really finish off the entire look. I used a vintage pattern from another book. I think it's one of those Minerva style books that I got from the antique library online. I'll leave a link to that website if you are interested in looking at some vintage knitwear or crocheted pieces. Then I would highly recommend checking out that website. They have quite a few booklets for free that you can look at, but I found one pattern that had instructions on how to make these crochet balls, but someone on Ravelry also has a separate pattern for that, and it's basically the same. It's pretty straightforward. You make a magic loop, you crochet a couple of single crochets in that magic loop, then you double that amount of single crochets on the next round, and then you just then you crochet another round without making any increases, and then you basically have your button. You just stuff some scrap yarn into it and then you sew it up. So pretty straightforward. I'll leave a link in the description box below. And then we have aside from the buttons, the bow tie here is the showstopper. Yeah, it's looking a bit, I wouldn't necessarily say jank, but it's looking a bit rough here. It kind of collapses if you don't put in any support. So I had actually sewn on some, with some very thin sewing thread, I had sewed it to the front here so that it really opens up and it looks very neat, but I didn't secure it all that well. I wasn't too sure how it would look, so I just kind of haphazardly, I think I basted it more than I actually sewed it on. So what I'm going to do after this podcast is I'm going to take just the the Holst Garn yarn, and I'm going to actually secure it well, properly onto the sweater. But it looks quite interesting, but it's not that hard to make. I had to do this by hand because my machine is not one of those brother ones that you have those electric carriages that you can actually do moss knitting. I just knit this by hand, and I do enjoy doing the finishing touches by hand. Actually, it's rather fun. But yeah, this is just basic moss stitch. So what you do is at the start you cast on, I believe, 2 stitches, and then every row, I believe, you increase 1 stitch at the beginning of the row. And so at some point you just get this triangle, right? And then you just knit straight until you have your desired length, and then you just decrease in the same manner, and then you have a strip with 2 triangles, and you make one longer than the other. I thought I made them significantly bigger, but because in the original pattern picture the back bow tie is bigger, or well, significantly bigger in my opinion, but that doesn't really seem to be the case here. So that's something that I'm going to change in the future. I think I will also cast on more stitches to get that very clear effect that it's a big bow and then a small bow. But once you've done that, you essentially just knit a tiny moss strip, and you sew the beginning and the end together, and you just take the 2 strips and you pull them through, and that's how you get the bow tie. So it looks very interesting, but it's actually rather simple and straightforward. I did secure the positioning by sewing the ties, the strips, to the hole here in the middle, just so that there's no shifting and it won't look out of place. Another thing I would like to mention was that despite making 2 swatches, one that was about 15 by 15 centimeters and another that was a whole ass sleeve, I still did not get the gauge right. The stitch gauge was on point. The row gauge, however, I was a bit off. I had initially measured the row gauge to be 32 rows, and it turned out that it was more in the ballpark of 34, 35 rows. And what happened was that the armhole depth went to I don't know, about it decreased by about a centimeter, I think, a centimeter or 2, and the sleeves went to bracelet length and the body was a bit cropped. Now I had figured this out during the process, because what I like to do is measure, well, I'll make a piece and then I'll take it to my ironing board, I'll get it a bit damp, I'll lightly steam press it, and then I'll take the measurements. And whilst I was doing that, I figured that this length would actually work quite well, and I continued to work on it. I didn't decide to start over again, and I think it worked in my favor. I actually really liked having the sweater at this length, so I'm very happy with it. Also, I feel that the shoulders are really, really good. It just hits me at my shoulder point. This is, I think, the widest that I can take before my sweaters start to collapse. So it's also nice to have a piece to know what the max width is for one's shoulders. I had no idea how important something like that could be until I really started trying to get a more fitted silhouette. And now knowing that it explains a lot why some things that I've worked on in the past didn't look all that right on me. So I'm very happy that I learned that. Is there anything else that I would like to mention about this? No. Oh, yes. Yes. Okay. So these are just very small things, but for anyone who might be wanting to, is that a correct sentence? Anyone who is looking to maybe knit this up, because it did seem that there was some interest in this pattern, I would recommend to slip all the stitches on the sides at the buttons, no, the bow ties, at the bow ties, because it gave me a very neat edge. I got a reminder about this right before I started this sweater, and I definitely like how clean the bow tie looks as compared to if I would just knit the first stitch of a row every single time. So yes, this is my smart style for that long planned holiday design number 819 sweater. Now, I would like to move on to I think this was the last sweater that I discussed in the last podcast episode, and that is this top right here. It's the 1930s jumper with a soft bow. Source unknown, but I got this from Vintage Knit Affair. A link is in the description box. Okay, so yes, the yarn that I used for this, it's Donegal yarns. It's their Irish heather in 1-ply, and you know, having knit with this a lot in the past couple of weeks, I don't think I would recommend using this 1-ply yarn. Because it's 1-ply yarn, there's only one twist, and so the fabric does bias, but it doesn't bias that much, I do have to say. It's not the worst thing, but I personally do enjoy working with plied yarn more. In any case, the yardage of this yarn is 225 meters per 50 grams, and the colors that I used were red. This is called Berry Crush. Then we have white, which is called White, and this light blue is called Sky. So it's done. Oh wait, I completely forgot. Ta-da! Okay. Ta-da! I apologize. Yes, so jumper with a soft bow. I made this on the machine, and let me just tell you about the construction. It's pretty straightforward. As for the tension, it's knit at 28 stitches per 10 centimeters or 4 inches. It's the same as in the original pattern, and it's knit quite traditionally vintage. Everything is knit flat and then seamed together. I started at the bottom with some 1x1 rib and then increased over the entire row. I should start at the back actually. I increased heavily, moving from 1x1 rib to stockinette stitch, and then I just worked my way up straight, cast off stitches, decreased stitches, and then just did some shoulder shaping by means of short rows. And then I started working on the front. It was knit basically the same way, however there are a bit more stitches at the front to accommodate the bust. And then here there is this V-neck shaping here, so it was originally just a V-neck and then more of the kind of round neck shaping that you see here on my top as well. And then did the shoulder shaping, of course, with short rows. I think this was also in the pattern that the front was longer than the back, so I didn't modify that or anything. I just did what the pattern told me to do, and so I used the 3-needle bind off to attach the front to the back, and as you can see here, the front does go over the back, so you have the seam just here. And then once that is done, you have to start working on the puffed sleeves. And yeah, so the basic construction of this is you start with 2 separate sections that you knit. You have, the way it's knit is you start off with one section and then you constantly increase on one side, so you get this kind of scooped section here, and you do the same but then mirrored. And so once you've reached the desired height, that's when you attach both of them, and then you knit across and you do a basic sleeve with quite a shallow sleeve cap, because there's quite a bit of puff, so it's very wide and shallow. So that's the sleeve. And then once you're done with that, you can do some crochet finishing. I did 2 rows of single crochet, and then I crocheted a buttonhole the same way as the brown sweater. And then you have the bow tie here, which I think is the most interesting part aside from the finishing at the sleeves. The bow tie is knit using moss stitch. Again, I knit this by hand, so you cast on, I believe, 2 stitches, and then you keep increasing on one side. So you get this slanted section here at the bottom. You knit straight for a number of rows. I can't remember how long I made this, but I think I made this longer than the pattern asked to, but I'll get back to that in a second. So once that's done, you seam everything to the neck, and then you do some crochet finishing. I did the same as what I did on the sleeves, just single crochet all around twice, and also here in the V neck section. And that was pretty much it. I had to make a lot of modifications to actually get this to fit me. I don't know how to explain the feeling, but it's very nice to be able to figure out why things aren't working for you exactly. It took me a number of people actually to tell me that I was knitting sweaters that were too wide for me, to realize, oh, okay, I actually have to make some modifications that require more work than just shortening pieces in order to get things to fit me. And I don't know, it feels very liberating. And now that I have worked on this over a number of sweaters, it feels very, I don't know, calming, like, okay, I know exactly what I need to do now, so there's not that constant uncertainty and frustration when working hard on something and then you put it on and it's just collapsing on your frame. So yes, going back to the modifications, I had to take in a lot of yoke cross front area essentially. I think I reduced the shoulder seam by about 2 centimeters on each side. I think the cross front measurement here is about 27 centimeters, and it's important, especially with a sweater like this that has puffed sleeves, that has gathered sleeves, that the sweater is sitting within your shoulder bone. The reason to that is because there's a lot of extra fabric that is hanging off of these off of your bodice, and that is going to pull on your bodice. And so in order to make sure that that extra weight doesn't pull over your shoulder and makes your armhole sag, you need to have it well within your shoulder bone. And that's what I achieved by making the cross front so short. Now, as a result of this, of course, the armhole shape changes. I also changed the armhole depth. I think I took about 2 centimeters off. It's about 15 centimeters right here. And so you are going to have to, well, I had to redraft the sleeves, and I hadn't done that before with a puffed sleeve, and it took 2 tries to, well, this was my second try, and I actually don't think that I completely succeeded at what I wanted to achieve. The first sleeve, I actually didn't take into account what the pattern said. And here's the issue that I found with this pattern. The pattern tells you that it's made for beginners in the 1930s, but it omits some information that I found to be quite essential to getting a good fit. It does not tell you how high or to what length you have to knit things. It just tells you knit this amount of rows, and that's also fine, because I can understand if you're a new knitter that you might not want to have to do all these calculations. But the thing is, the pattern doesn't give you a row gauge, so you could have a very, very tight row gauge depending on how you knit, and then end up with something that doesn't fit because the pattern doesn't tell you how long everything has to specifically be. And the pattern only tells you the length of each piece. So the front, it tells you, I think it's 19 inches, and the back is 17 inches, something like that. But the sleeve cap, there's no information about how tall the sleeve cap should be. So I was kind of just looking at, okay, what's the average row gauge of some fingering weight yarn that is knit at a tension of 28 stitches per 10 centimeters or 4 inches. But I didn't do that the first time around, and so I just kind of did some shaping that I thought was going to be correct, and it wasn't. What happened was that it looked very strange. The sleeve cap was too long, I believe. I don't even know how to explain it, but the puff at the sleeves, nothing was popping. Nothing was puffing, and the bottom looked very weird and very long. So that was an issue that I had to deal with. I went back and did the whole thing of figuring out how many rows on average there should be, and I changed the sleeve cap, had to do the calculations again, and that gave me this sleeve. And I am somewhat content, but not completely, because as you can see here, the sleeve cap is not long or high enough, I should say. And you can see that also because the underarm is quite long, and then the top, it has this kind of shape, when actually the sleeve cap should be ending somewhere here, so that it looks better. so that it doesn't pull, because there is a slight pull here at the bottom that I have noticed wearing this. So in the future, because I do plan to make this again in the future, I'm planning on redrafting the sleeve cap again, making it a bit longer, and making it a bit longer. Yes, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make it a bit longer so that it falls a bit nicer over my shoulders or one's shoulders, and there won't be any pulling. So that is something that I've learned from this top. This nevertheless was a success. I learned lots of new things. The gathering was really fun to do. I'm figuring out what the best way to do that is. I thought the nicest and easiest way is just to start the seaming from the bottom, work your way up, and then you can count how much access you have at the top and then do the gathering in that way. You'll have more ends to weave in, but I do feel that it makes planning much more relaxed, easier. So I am still very happy with this top, and I'm just going to keep it as is. Yeah, I think this is about it for this top right here. And then, oh yeah, yes. Next up, ta-da, is this top right here. This is my most recent finished blouse, and I am so proud of it. It was a really nice journey, and I'm just gonna get right into it. I'll start off with where I got this from. So the pattern that I used was from this book right here. I went online and bought a couple of vintage Japanese knitting books. I had initially thought this to be from the 1940s, but I did some more research because basically the date is printed on top of her hair, which is also in black. So I couldn't read. I could read that it was from April, and I think it also says it here that it's from April, but I couldn't read which year, but it's from Showa 27, which is 1952, so it's early 50s. The book is called Yousai Amimono no Style Bukku, so dressmaking, knitwear, spring style book, and it's from Fujin Seikatsu. It's a women's lifestyle magazine. I'm not too sure if they still exist, but they might actually. But yes, I got this book. The reason why I was so eager to get this was because of this pattern right here. And one thing I really like about these Japanese vintage books, they're from the 40s and 50s and even 30s, and they have colored pages, lots of them, and they don't just plop in one pattern. They try and make use of that space. So it's just, you'll have 5 models on one singular page, and that's really appreciated because it really brings to life these patterns. One thing that I recently heard from someone, I had posted this top on Reddit, and they had commented saying that they always see these vintage patterns and think, okay, why would someone wear that? And then when someone actually makes it and you can see it in real time how it looks, they're like, oh yeah, I get it now, I understand it. And I feel that color helps a lot with that. When we look at black and white pictures, a lot of I feel like our brain associates that to old, stuffy, even perhaps. And I even sometimes fall victim to that. But what I like to do, and something that helps me a lot, is to immerse myself and look at these patterns multiple times and see them for what they are rather than my assumptions, if that makes any sense. And the longer I start to stare at them, the less kind of all that noise, well, the more the noise kind of falls away, and I can see a piece for what it truly is and can be in the future. And that's when I get that click, that's when I'm like, okay, yes, this is something I want to try out, and I want to look for a very nice color combination that will work. And of course, there are just patterns that you see at once and you know that you just want to try that out, of course. Okay, so here we have it. It's on this page. It's this one right here. I was looking at copyright. How copyright law works in Japan is that I believe it used to be 50 years. 50 years after the death of the author, that's when copyright is donezo. But in the 1970s, it changed to 70 years. Now, when it comes to magazines, it's 70 years after publication. So technically, this would be in the domain of public domain, in the public domain. However, if a name in the magazine is attributed to a certain design, then you still have that copyright law of 70 years after the death of the author. And I had initially thought that the name was here, was right here. It says Kuga Yoshiko, and I looked it up, and it turns out it's actually the model's name. She was an actress that actually passed away just last year, a very famous Japanese actress. So that was not the name of the author, but I'm pretty sure it's mentioned here. So yeah, this is not something that I can post online and show the pattern, because someone did ask me to if I could show how a Japanese pattern works, and it has to be in the realm of public domain if I'm going to show the entire pattern. So I have the option of finding one where the name is not mentioned throughout the magazine and using that, or I can just make a very simple one and explain how things work. So those are my two options. But yeah, having said that, let's get into the pattern. I'll just set this one aside here. It's very interesting because I had initially thought that this was all made using intarsia, but it's actually not. Everything is knit separately and then seamed together, and that's exactly what I did. I felt that it would be easier anyways because I knit this on my machine, and I recently purchased an intarsia carriage. However, it only works on the main bed, which means that I can only do knit stitches in intarsia, and so I would have to seam the ribbing, knit the ribbing separately, and then, or with another carriage, and then seam it to the other side. And then you have to deal with two different carriages with different pitches, tensions, and I just felt it was easier to just work with my main carriage, and so I knit this all separately. So not only are the colors separate, but the sides are separate as well. So in order to create the front, you have to knit 4 separate pieces. And the nice thing of this top, of course, is that it's a dolman sleeve, dolman type sweater. So the sleeves and the body are knit at the same time, so there's no seam here. And this is actually the first time that I made a top with this construction, and I do have to say, with not having that construction, having to do the calculations and all that stuff was very relaxing, and I think it still looks really, really good. So the way the sleeve shaping is done is once you have reached the desired height and desired width for the bust circumference, then you start increasing on the sides, and then eventually more rapidly. So the way this was done was that I started off with a couple of increases, then I cast on some stitches, and then I cast on more stitches. And then to get this, how would I say it, a kind of, I guess, to create a bit of a sleeve cap shaping so that the arms aren't straight here, if that makes any sense. I did also increase as I was knitting the sleeve so that it falls nicely over my shoulder. Yes, so that's actually this section up here. The bottom I hadn't yet explained, but it's pretty straightforward. It's just 2x2 rib, and I increased heavily here at the bottom, and then I added a couple of stitches on the sides, because I did actually change a couple of things. The original pattern is designed to be 80 centimeters at the bust, and that would have given me some slight negative ease, but I wanted to challenge myself and try and see if I could grade this up and see if I could get this to fit someone of 90 centimeters. I know that's not a whole a huge deal, but you know, you have to start somewhere, right? And I thought, since this is such I wouldn't say basic, but a simplified construction, I thought it would be quite feasible just to add some extra stitches at the sides here, so that I would have 90 centimeters here at the bust. And then, yeah, I think that's basically most of what I did. I didn't really change much in terms of the increases at the arms, because there's not that much of size jump from 80 centimeters to 90 centimeters. And so that's what I did, and I decided, of course, to keep the neck section the same. I heard apparently that is one of the sweater pitfalls that you'll see often when people start to grade for larger sizes. One of the things that you'll see is that the neck is very wide and very sloppy, and that's because it's not taken into account that the neck doesn't increase proportionately to the rest of the body. For instance, your bust circumference. Just because you have a bust circumference of 160 centimeters doesn't mean that your neck is twice as wide as my neck. So that is something that I, of course, had to keep in mind. So basically, the extra width at the bust was distributed over the sleeves. I made sure that to take into account that it wasn't too much added width at the sleeves, so that it would change the model. But I did some calculations and some measurements, and it didn't seem like that would be the case. So I just kept it like that. And that's why this one Japanese book I have was very interesting to me. I'll grab it. This book, of course, you can never make me hate this book or stop talking about this book. It's gonna be here for the long run. Of course, we have Jibun saizu no seettaa o amu, Sukina saizu, Sukina ito de amu hoho by Tomoko Nishimura, one of the goats of within the Japanese knitting world. Oh, this book is so good, and I just keep coming back to it. I'm not going to make any promises, but I am going to try and take down some notes, give a brief summary of what's in this book and all the other grading books that I got from Japan, because I actually, the past couple of months have taken the time to slowly go through them. I mean, you've seen me talk about that Brother knitting textbook. I'm reading, I'm learning. But the nice thing about this book, and this is something I really do appreciate this, is that for all different types of sweater constructions, she shows in this book the effect an adjustment at one place will have on another section. For instance, here. Yeah, here. Wait. Wait, I think this, maybe, let me just get a good example. Oh, yeah, yes, okay. Here, for instance, you have a raglan sweater, and so she shows that if you take some width away from the body here, it's going to affect the length of the sweater at the sleeves, the length of the sleeves at the yoke. And just having that visual representation has made me very much so aware that, you know, I might change one thing about this sweater, but I also have to check very well that if I'm making this adjustment, that this might have consequences for other sections in my sweater, and I have to make sure that those are accounted for and that I remedy them if I need to. I would kiss this book if I could. Well, I can, but I won't. I had to move, so sorry for the inconvenience and extra background noise, but I'm gonna try and get through this podcast. So, getting back to the sweater, like I said, everything is knit in 4 pieces, and then you originally had some garter stitch here at the neck side and at the sleeves in order to prevent curling of the fabric. And I had initially tried to do that on the machine, but for those who are experienced with machine knitting, you'll know that garter stitch is very time consuming on the machine. It is even slower than just doing it by hand. And so I decided that I could actually get the same effect or something similar by just using some single crochet. So that's what I did on the sleeves and here at the center, and it worked out quite nice. I'm quite happy with it. I actually really enjoy adding different types of crafts to my knitting, but after that I started working on the neck, the collar, and that was also in garter stitch, so I knew I was going to do that by hand as well. Now the pattern tells you to actually work 2 strips of garter stitch separate from the body, and then afterwards you stitch it on. So after all of that was done, seamed up everything, I again did the short rows at the top. The original pattern tells you to bind off stitches. That's just my go-to. I feel like I don't even have to say it anymore, but the pattern itself tells you to knit the collar in garter stitch, 2 separate pieces. You seam it to each other and then seam it onto the body. I decided to just start by picking up stitches. I knit this all by hand in intarsia, and the first time it looked okay, but it was quite floppy here at the back. There was some extra fabric that was puckering here a bit, and aside from that, the 2 front edges here, they were almost overlapping, and I was wondering why that was happening to my collar, and basic geometry told me that I am knitting this at an angle because of the neck shaping here, and so in order to get this to be straight, I'm going to have to make some decreases to turn the collar straight again. So I did that, and I also heavily decreased on the first row. I ripped everything back, heavily decreased, and then it was just regularly decreasing at this section here to keep it straight, and that really did the trick. As for the cord, I had no idea what the pattern was saying. I knew I wanted to make this with an I-cord because I like I-cords, so I knit an I-cord, then switched halfway through and then knit this other section, and then I just seamed it onto the collar. And then I just went all around using some single crochet, because I felt that that would really strengthen the collar and give it a clean finish. I believe the pattern tells you to make some cord and just go all around the collar, but I felt this would look a bit nicer and give some more attention to the I-cord, whilst the single crochet is just doing its work and getting this collar to look nice and clean. And then I did my classic crochet button balls. I did some single crochet and some slip stitches to create this closure, and I sewed it onto one side so I can take out, well, I'm not going to do it now, but I can take out the cord on one side and it's just going to stay on the other side just to secure it, and I never have to worry about that. But I do have to say that this was very challenging in terms of finishing techniques. I was struggling trying to get all these pieces to look rather clean, and that's definitely one of the moments. In Dutch we call it jezelf tegenkomen, meeting yourself, in the sense of, you know, you have to acknowledge, okay, this is a section within knitting finishing that I am not that advanced in, or I don't have that much experience in that, and so I need to take a step back, read up on things, look into things, and try and improve and practice. Of course, I think that's the most important thing, practicing and getting better. So that is yeah, something that I've learned from this project. I'm very happy with the end result. I'm very happy. I'm going to have to kind of fly through some things because, again, it's starting to become a bit long. So yes, maybe an update on my boyfriend's sweater. I was using some Donegal Irish yarn to knit him a set-in sleeve, and I haven't worked on it since showcasing what I had on the podcast. Well, I have worked on it for quite some time, but well, I have worked a bit on it. I'm almost done with the ribbing at the bottom, but yeah, I still need to do an entire sleeve. And right now, with my wrists and the shoulders, I'm trying to get a bit stronger. I'm trying to be better about exercise and making sure that if I don't knit too much that I end up with another injury. I'm just giving a bunch of excuses. I haven't finished it yet. I didn't meet the goal. I didn't get the bingo, but it's okay. He's very nice about it, very patient about it. And in the meantime, I offered to make something else. Okay, so here's the thing. He's very particular about what he likes in terms of sweaters, and he's staring me down at the moment. Not that I say anything bad, but he's very particular about what he likes, and it's kind of up to me to find a good pitch to show him and convince him that he needs this thing or that it's going to look really nice. And that's really hard for vintage clothes because mostly, you know, they're quite out there, and the vintage style, especially menswear, is not something that is very in at the moment. But I was scrolling through this French magazine and I came across this very cool intarsia stitch pattern. it's very simple. It's just kind of like a staircase type of situation, and I showed it to him, and he really liked it. And I said, you know what, I am going to make this one first for you because I feel I can finish this faster than knitting that sweater by hand. And he agreed. So I'm very excited for this because this is actually the first vintage piece of knitwear that I'm making for a man, and also for him. Yes. What I'm doing in a nutshell is I'm just taking the stitch pattern, and I took his measurements a couple of days ago, and I'm going to use my Japanese brother knitting textbook book. There's a section in the back on how to draft something for a man. I'm going to take a look at that. I'm going to take a look at my modern Japanese drafting book, and I'm going to draft a block for him, and then I'm going to design the sweater on top of that block and just figure it out. So yesterday I made this with my intarsia carriage. I have to figure out what to do with these long floats because they're not that nice. I think I'm just going to cut it every couple of rows just to make sure that it doesn't look bad, and I'm just going to weave it in. I don't think that's going to be too much of an issue because, of course, you know, with intarsia you always have this twisting here. I can just weave in the end here and it will be no issue. Again, this is the Donegal yarn that I have been using for a while, and you can see some slight biasing. That's kind of the downside of this pattern, but I don't think it's that bad. I actually don't think it's that bad at all. There's a slight slant, but I feel like this pattern will be intriguing enough to kind of forget seeing it. I don't know for sure. I'm just gonna try and see how things work out, and if they don't, then they don't, and I'm going to have to find something else. It'll be fine. I'm sure it's going to be fine. And if not, I can use this as a hindsight video clip. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to talk about is this blouse that I think I also showed in the last episode. I still had some other things I wanted to show, but that's just going to be for another podcast episode. Okay, so here I have a cardigan, and this is the second thing that I tried making on my knitting machine, and it was kind of a flop. I made a Reddit post a couple of weeks ago, I think almost 2 months now, talking about this and asking for help because I at the time wasn't too sure why it wasn't looking all that nice. This is not the proper, how should I say it? It's not the proper top for me to wear underneath this because it's quite thick, but I think you'll understand the issue rather quickly. Okay, so this was I think the second or third sleeve attempt. So don't even look at this because this is not good whatsoever. It's not even an improvement. But this is the first sleeve, and as you can see, there's some bunching up here. The sleeve is drooping, and it's essentially, it has collapsed. The armhole has collapsed. And this was before I really knew again about, you know, your shoulder seam, how important that is to have the correct length in order to keep your knits structured. And so I was really wondering what's going on, why is it looking so weird? And some people mentioned that. Some even, I can even put a picture here of me showing the issue that I had. And someone, I believe, said, whoa, I can even I can nearly just pinch the dot out of your bodice, essentially. So there was quite a bit that needed to be changed. So I'm going to try and do that in the near future. This is based off of a 30s French pattern. I lost exactly the information on which magazine exactly, but it's Marie Claire from the 30s, I believe. I will try and look up the information and put it in the description box below, but it's actually quite simple construction. It's well, this is something that I've noticed a lot with French patterns, is that they make sure that the front is longer and wider than the back, and I feel that it does accommodate the fit a lot better. But yes, the front is longer than the back. It's in the same traditional vintage style. Everything is knit flat. You start off with some 2x2 ribbing here at the bottom, and then you, well, in the pattern it says like you don't increase, but I feel like looking at the pattern, actually you should increase. The pattern was trash, I have to say. Well, maybe it's my French that wasn't good enough, but there were some, I noticed there were quite a couple of mistakes in there, and I found that the sleeve cap also was, the perimeter, I did the calculations, the perimeter was way shorter than that of the armhole, and so I was struggling trying to ease in this sleeve in the first place. Things were not going quite well. And then you also have a moss stitch detail here for the button band, and then you have a picot edge here, and the pattern tells you to pick up for the picot edge all over, also on the button band. But the problem is, well, okay, I'll show you the problem, is that this section, it's not, it's overlapping and it doesn't look good. So this is just a nightmare. It's a nightmare following this pattern just from without thinking, okay, I need to modify it, because that's how I went into it. I barely modified anything. I think the only thing I decided to do different was knit the button band separately from the body, and that was a good decision. But regardless, this needed some work, and like I said, it's been almost 2 months now. I have gained the amount of experience that I need to actually make this work for me, so I'm gonna try and do that in the future. I don't know if it's going to be within 2 weeks, but I just want to just document this because I am going to unravel all of this, or at least try, because I did seam it up with the same yarn, so I don't know how easily I'm going to be able to unravel this. I also had a second attempt, and it didn't go well. But I don't know, yeah, I was already in the process of unraveling this one right here, but I do feel confident that I'm going to be able to finish this. So this is going to be a project. The sweater for my boyfriend is going to be a project. And then I have one really cool Japanese sweater also from that same book that I'm planning to work on. And that's that. I have been reading some literature. I looked at the Columbia knitting and crochet manual. I'll leave a link to that in the description box below, because you can look at it for free on the Internet Archive website if you have an account. And there were some interesting things that I found in that particular manual, but not that much information overall. It was mostly just a stitch dictionary, just basic knitting and crocheting techniques and motifs. But that is something I will discuss in a future episode. I am going to cut it off here. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon in another video. Bye bye!